Hi. Hey, welcome all. Able to day research plan. So I'm Christy pulling I'm going to share my slides in just a moment, and I'm joined by some wonderful colleagues that are going to speak to you today about the research plan in action. And so we have Dr. Natasha Desjardins from the White House Council on Environmental Quality, Dr. Melissa Smar from the National Cancer Institute of the National Institutes of Health, Ms. Sarah Mazur of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and Ms. Kelly Crawford of the Department of Energy. And so we're going to start out. We're going to have a couple of different subsections of our journey today. And we're going to start out introducing the science, data, and research plan. And then we're going to talk about the research plan in action and look forward to any questions we may have. And we're going to have a moderated discussion. And so looking forward to being able to share some of the work we've been doing with all of you. Can we see the slides? Perfect.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, greetings again. Today we're going to talk about our science, data, and research plan. And this plan was called for by President Biden in Executive Order 14096, revitalizing our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second, just to give folks some background on the executive order itself. But we're also going to talk a bit about how we developed the research plan, the contents of the plan, and again, I'm going to have that panel discussion at the end to talk about how the research plan is already shaping up within some federal agencies. And so, before we dig into the science, data, and research, I want to set the stage with a quote from the president that he gave on environmental justice on Earth Day in 2022. He said, "We've put environmental justice at the center of what we do, addressing the disproportionate environmental or health, environmental, and economic impacts that have been borne primarily by communities of color, places too often left behind." And so, since day one, President Biden and Vice President Harris have worked tirelessly to secure historic and long overdue investments in environmental justice, advance science based regulations that reduce environmental pollution, strengthen enforcement of the nation's environmental and civil rights laws, and to elevate the voices of environmental justice communities in the White House and throughout the administration. During his first week in office, President Biden signed Executive Order 14008, which was tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, launching the most ambitious environmental justice agenda ever undertaken by the federal government. So, Executive Order 14008 recognizes that all Americans deserve to live in healthy, thriving communities. But in fact, too many people lack access to safe places to live, work, play, grow, and learn. And so, as I said earlier, today we're going to talk about Executive Order 14096. And so, this is in addition to Executive Order 14008, where President Biden has demonstrated his commitment to environmental justice. And this executive order was signed on April 21st, 2023. It directs the federal government to build upon and strengthen its commitment to deliver environmental justice to all communities across the nation through approaches that are informed by scientific research, high quality data, and meaningful engagement with communities that have environmental justice concerns. There's a QR code there if you want to check it out, some good reading. The EO sets forth a goal of fulfilling the nation's promises of justice, liberty, and equality for all people. It states that restoring and protecting a healthy environment wherever people live, play, work, learn, grow, and worship is a matter of justice and a fundamental duty that the federal government must uphold on behalf of all people. In Section 2 of the executive order, it also provides a definition of environmental justice, the first time we've had a definition that's applied across all federal agencies. And so this definition includes disability, which was a new characteristic that I hadn't seen before. But as it's defined, environmental justice includes the just treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of income, race, and color, national origin, tribal affiliation, or disability, in agency decision making and other federal activities that affect human health and the environment. It also includes that people that that are going to be protected under this environmental justice definition are, fully protected from disproportionate and adverse health and environmental risks and hazards, that they have equitable access to healthy and sustainable and resilient environments. And this includes the impacts of overlapping and cumulative burdens, both environmental and beyond, and the impacts related to climate change and the legacy of racism and other structural or systemic barriers. And so there are a number of specific actions outlined in the executive order, again, that I encourage folks to read more about. But for our discussion today, I'm going to highlight Section 5 of the order, which instructs the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, where I'm a staff member, to establish an environmental justice subcommittee of the National Science and Technology Council. The subcommittee consists of federal agency representatives, is led by OSTP in consultation with the Council on Environmental Quality, and the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Transportation serve as co-chairs of this committee. And so the committee was tasked with addressing the need for a coordinated federal strategy to identify and address gaps in science, data, and research related to environmental justice. There are a couple of other tasks that were given to the committee, including hosting an annual summit on the connection of science, data, and research with policy and action on environmental justice with the White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council. But today, I'm just going to highlight this one section here. So this is Section 5.3, where it directs the EJ subcommittee to prepare and update every other year an environmental justice science, data, and research plan, which is going to be the topic of our discussion today. In developing the research plan, the EJ subcommittee was guided by Section 3 of the executive order, which includes a robust charge on meaningful engagement that directs federal agencies to provide timely opportunities for members of the public to share information or concerns and to fully consider that public input as a part of the decision-making process. The EJ subcommittee engaged with external entities through conversations with individuals and groups, through listening sessions. We had a 90-day request for comment or request for information comment period. The subcommittee also had our work informed by other related efforts, including the work of the Ocean Policy Committee, the National Science and Technology Council subcommittees on equitable data, open science, indigenous knowledge, the Framework for Scientific Integrity Policy and Practice. So a number of reports and materials that existed prior to our work. So we weren't completely reinventing the wheel. We also relied on recommendations from the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, the EPA's National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, literature reviews. And as we also had input from agencies and other NSTC subcommittees, including the Air Quality and Community Health Research Subcommittee. And we also had extensive engagement with other components of the Executive Office of the President, including the White House Council on Native American Affairs. And so these engagement activities provided an opportunity for the subcommittee to shape recommendations on science, data, and research activities that responded to the priorities of communities with environmental justice concerns, and also were able to fold themselves within existing agency practices and frameworks. And so let's get into the research plan a little bit. The research plan was released in July of 2024 at a community-centered event at the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum. And this was an opportunity for us to be able to bring the White House out into the community, which was a really wonderful event. And so if you're in the DC area and you haven't visited the Anacostia Community Museum, I highly suggest it. It's a really wonderful space. And so the research plan is broken down into 4 thematic areas. The first is enhancing meaningful involvement and engagement of the public. The second is fortifying treatment, just treatment, equitable access, and protection from environmental injustice. The third is strengthening work in partnership with non-federal entities. And the fourth is institutionalizing environmental justice. And so you should hopefully see hints of the executive order definition in these themes. Now let's walk through each of these areas briefly now. So this first thematic area focuses on meaningful involvement and engagement by all people in the nation, including members of communities with environmental justice concerns, to inform science, data, and research activity in the federal government. And so this recommendation is focused on the identification and enhancement of concrete pathways for communities to be able to meaningfully engage in the co-creation, shaping, determining the priorities of, and interpreting and invalidating the findings of research. It also has a recommendation that focuses on the development of transition, evaluation, and continuity plans for research that are involving members of communities with environmental justice concerns. And it also recommends that agencies increase transparency and usability of information and tools that can be impactful to members of communities with environmental justice concerns via simplified and accessible public facing portals and virtual resource centers. The second thematic area focuses on just treatment, equitable access, and protection from environmental injustice in federal science, data, and research. These recommendations are intended to help strengthen and improve analyses used to inform decisions relevant to the advancement of environmental justice. So, decisions being the really important area here. So, in this section, we focused on privacy protections, making them visible and understandable for the public, and beginning the process of identifying folks that might fall through the cracks. We also had recommendations on gap filling that are important for decision making. We recommended that agencies use a precautionary approach to existing data, weighting the indication of harm more strongly than the indication of no harm, and that agencies prioritize filling gaps, including with the use of community derived data to support decision making relevant to environmental justice. Recommendation 6 focuses on cumulative impacts, building frameworks, identifying decision areas, including funding that might intersect with cumulative impacts, creating coordinating spaces for cumulative impact work across agencies in ways that can increase the benefits to communities while also reducing the science, data, and research related burdens on those communities that are being served. Additionally, in this area, we highlight the need to integrate the use of more qualitative methods and mixed methods into analysis, how we can use things like art, oral histories, family archives, and other sources of data to inform decisions. We talked about and focused on the social determinants of health and how we can integrate that into research in support of the achievement of environmental justice. We also had a recommendation that focused on how agencies can think holistically about their data governance, sharing, management, and other types of practices that can, that could have a disproportionate impact potentially on communities with environmental justice concerns. And then finally, our recommendation 10 makes suggestions that are for specific analyses and feedback loops and coordinating activities that EPA can utilize in the toxics release inventory and analysis to make it, meaningful and more meaningful and impactful to all communities across the country. And so, while this one is specific to EPA due to a call out in the executive order, there, could be learning that could happen for other agencies in this recommendation as well. The third area focuses on partnering and working with non-federal entities to inform environmental justice and relevant research, science, and data activities. Recommendation 11. So we had one specific one that focused exclusively on federal engagement and consultation with federally recognized tribes. The important thing to note here, though, is that all of the recommendations in the plan are intended to be applicable to all communities with environmental justice concerns, including Indigenous communities. And so with this recommendation, we highlight that federal agencies should recognize the sovereign interests of tribal nations with regard to their data, knowledge, and other information, and that they should candidly acknowledge any limitations in keeping information confidential. And this really, again, applies to federally recognized tribes because of the sovereign relationship and government to government relationships that exist between these nations and the federal government. Recommendations 12 and 13 focus on working and partnering with non-federal entities. These two recommendations focus on insular areas, which are jurisdictions that are neither a part of or one of several states or a federal district. And people in these areas are notably and impactfully missing from major data sets that can be important for assigning benefits. So really wanting to call out this important population and geographic area. And then we also focused on ways in which the federal government can help to consult and collaborate with entities outside of the federal government to help establish networks of communication that not only connect different state, local, and federal agencies together, but also facilitates the exchange of science data and research findings across organizations and platforms. So how can we make sure that groups are working together for the benefit of communities? And then our final area here is focused on how federal agencies can institutionalize environmental justice into science data and research activities. That is, how to embed environmental justice into the work and culture of agencies in ways that are lasting and endurable. These areas provide information and direction on how agencies can deepen their ability to identify and address gaps and research related to environmental justice by building cultures and practices that ensure that all communities reap the benefits of scientific discovery, research, efficacy, and innovation. And so the first of these recommendations, focuses on building diverse, multidisciplinary staff to evaluate and address complex questions facing communities with environmental justice concerns. Another recommendation, two recommendations, focus on addressing sources of bias that might lead to gaps and inadequacies in data and analysis. So for recommendation 15 specifically, it calls on agencies to begin by recognizing that recognizing and identifying the ways that patterns of historical or ongoing structural racism, including implicit bias and other manifestations of structural inequities, could impact their science data collection and research activities relevant to environmental justice. Agencies can begin by developing pathways by which to dismantle and address the impacts that these biases may have had on their work and the broader scientific research and regulatory communities, and include training and other potential methods that can prevent these gaps and fill the gaps, and try to minimize the impacts of the results moving forward. And so we, also made a recommendation about how the federal government can work with environmental justice or communities with environmental justice concerns to, build those relationships of trust. It recommends that agencies develop principles for engaging with members of communities with environmental justice concerns, and that agencies develop and require training on meaningful engagement and scientific co-production with affected communities. And finally, our last recommendation highlights that the importance of translational science. That is the work that involves moving scientific discovery into tools, policies, and interventions that can be implemented in communities for real world benefit. And so this recommendation also calls for the incorporation of intersectionality into analyses. For example, how individuals exist within a range of overlapping identities. You can be, a Black woman, for example, and those different identities can lead to unique modes of discrimination and privilege. And so I'm going to close the introduction to the research plan with, again, a QR code for it. And we welcome, your thoughts, comments, and concerns that you may have about or questions that you may have about the plan. And you're welcome to send that to EJ at ostp.eop.gov. We're going to give you our email addresses for the folks that are on this panel in the second as well, too. So you're welcome to reach out to any of us. And we welcome any questions that folks may have at the end of this discussion today. And so I'm going to move us directly now into our panel so we can move beyond the words in a document that you can read anytime. Again, I suggest you pick it up and do some reading of it, and introduce our research panel in action. So today we're going to have Dr. Desjarnette, who's going to be moderating, and I've already introduced folks, but they're going to introduce themselves again in just a second. And so really excited to be able to turn things over to my colleagues that can talk about their work in agencies. And so I will stop sharing.
Fantastic. What a wonderful overview, and certainly want to acknowledge and thank you for your leadership in terms of being able for us to have this research plan that we are here discussing today, this really important resource. So I'm Dr. Natasha Desjarnette, Deputy Director for Environmental Justice Data and Evaluation at the White House Council on Environmental Quality. And I'm really proud to serve in the Biden-Harris administration and honored to be a part of the team that is working to advance President Biden's environmental justice agenda, the most ambitious environmental justice agenda ever undertaken by the federal government. And I'm proud to do this work alongside the agencies that are represented here on this virtual stage. So this panel discussion intends to share highlights of the research plan, demonstrate the research plan in action, and then also look towards the future. So we have the perfect slate of panelists to inform this discussion. And I'm really pleased to welcome each of them to the stage by way of really brief introductions, and then I'll turn it to each of them to take a couple minutes to share more about themselves and their work as well. So first we'll have Melissa Smar, Program Director of the Disparities Research Branch at the Center for Cancer Health Equity at the National Cancer Institute and the Institutes of Health. We'll also have Sarah Mazer, Principal Associate National Program Director for Sustainable and Healthy Communities Research Program at the EPA Office of Research and Development. And we'll be rounded out by Kelly Crawford, Senior Advisor for Energy and Environmental Justice in the Office of Energy Justice and Equity in the Office of Energy Justice Policy and Analysis at the U.S. Department of Energy. So we'll start with Melissa, then Sarah, and then Kelly to each share a couple minutes worth of introductions to your work. So, Melissa, you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Melissa Smart, and it's an honor to be here with you all. As Dr. Dejanet had said, I am currently serving as a program director in the Disparities Research Branch for the Center for Cancer Health Equity at NCI. Prior to that, however, I served as a program officer at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, specifically in the Population Health Branch, where I had the pleasure of supporting various initiatives to advance environmental justice and address environmental health disparities. Um, I also have a background in academia, so I understand a lot of the struggles of trying to advance environmental justice, both from the federal world as well as the academic perspective. And so, being a part of this subcommittee really was a labor of love and felt like a love letter from me to those out there in the environmental justice community and space. So thank you for having me here.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. As Natasha said, my name is Sarah Masher. I'm the Principal Associate National Program Director within the Sustainable and Healthy Communities Research Program at EPA's Office of Research and Development. So I've been at EPA for coming up on 20 years, and ORD is the scientific arm of EPA to support the work that our program and regional offices do. The Sustainable and Healthy Communities Research Program is one of 6 research programs within the Office of Research and Development. And our focus is really on cleaning up contaminated sites, sustainable materials management, and healthy and resilient communities. And so, across all 6 of our national research programs, we have a focus on cumulative impacts and environmental justice. And so our research program is lead for those efforts, the integration of those efforts across ORD, and then interfacing with the rest of the agency as well. So I look forward to the panel discussion and any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. And Kelly, you have the floor.
And thank you for having me. My name is Kelly Crawford. I'm a senior advisor in the Office of Energy Justice and Equity at the Department of Energy. The Office of Energy Justice and Equity is a new name for us. We were renamed last year, but this office was established with the National Energy Conservation Policy Act in 1978 as the Office of Minority Economic Impact within DOE. And our mandate is to develop and execute department-wide policies to implement applicable legislation and executive orders that strengthen diversity and inclusion goals and affect equal employment opportunities, small and disadvantaged businesses, minority educational institutions, and historically underrepresented groups. Now renamed the Office of Energy Justice and Equity, we have a goal of achieving equity both in the social and economic participation in the energy system, or meeting social and economic health burdens on those disproportionately harmed by the energy system, and essentially applying the basic principles of civil rights in the climate space. And we focus on 5 key statutory objectives, which include advising the Secretary on the effect of energy policies, regulations, and other actions of the department on its components on minorities and minority-owned businesses, enterprises, as well as strategies and initiatives to ensure that minorities are afforded multiple opportunities to participate fully in the energy programs of the department. For this session, most importantly, conducting an ongoing research program with the assistance of the administrator of the Energy Information Administration and other federal agencies determined by to ascertain the effects, including the socioeconomic and environmental effects of national energy programs, policies, and regulations, and the Department on Minorities, and to provide appropriate management and technical assistance to minority educational institutions and minority business enterprises that enable them to participate in the research, development, demonstration, and contract activities of the department. And so I'm really excited about this research agenda as laying a pathway for how we can ensure that energy and environmental justice are embedded in the research that we do to guide this work.
Wonderful. Thank you each for sharing. Thank you for sharing about your areas of expertise and the ways that your agencies are carrying out environmental justice. And hopefully, our audience is able to see a snapshot of the depth of expertise of this committee that has helped inform this report. And then, certainly, reminding you that this report was also informed through experts and communities across this nation that participated in the request for information and other ways that communities have helped to inform this work. So let's dive in to understand a little bit more about your agency's interaction with the research plan. So I'll start with a question that will be open to any one of the panelists who is interested in sharing. What elements of the research plan are most interesting or exciting to you, and why?
I guess I can start if that's okay with everyone. And so I guess I would selfishly say all of the elements. As I mentioned, I'm in the Center for Cancer Health Equity, and our entire center focuses on, achieving health equity by working towards eliminating health disparities, advancing inclusive research across the various fields, whether it's basic research or translational studies, promoting a diverse workforce, and then enhancing community engagement. Check, 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 check. Like I'm checking the boxes of the elements that are included in this research plan that directly like align with what we're doing. But from a more narrow view, I would say the one element that really gets me excited every time I reread this document is that this research plan, from my perspective, is encouraging federal agencies to look inward, to recognize and identify the ways that implicit bias and various manifestations of structural inequities could be, impacting their science, their data, the research activities that are relevant to environmental justice. And not only does it encourage agencies to, identify and recognize where these biases may be showing up, but then it also says, oh, and by the way, here's a little bit of a blueprint to help you develop the pathways for which to dismantle and address these historic impacts that the biases may have had on your work, but especially on the work that you have that touches the broader environmental justice community. And so I've just been really excited to see how this blueprint is calling out and bringing maybe a more awareness to what's been done already so that others can maybe try to replicate it. We talk about the Unite initiative that at the National Institutes of Health we have that is also an initiative that's focusing on emphasizing transparency, accountability, as well as funding opportunities. And we all know how challenging it can be for funding sometimes in the environmental justice space that's designed to encourage that inclusive research practice. We also think about the fact that this research plan highlights CDC's core commitment to health equity. Here we go again with another initiative that is saying we're trying to confront structural racism by embedding health equity considerations into every area of what we do, the science, the programs, the partnerships. And I love that this plan is highlighting those initiatives, and that's just a few.
Oh, wonderful. Really appreciate hearing that. I appreciate the checking off the boxes and the encouraging agencies to look inward. Well, having that as issued as a challenge. I hope I am not freezing up. I'm getting some errors on my end. Hopefully everyone is still able to hear me. I saw Sarah unmute, and I want to give Sarah some space if Sarah would like to answer this.
Sure. Thank you, Natasha. To kind of follow up on what Dr. Smart was saying, one of the things that's really exciting to me about the work of this committee and the report is the opportunity to kind of systematically work together across agencies and talk about these things that we're all struggling with independently and do so in a connected way. And so just to give a specific example of that, I want to talk about cumulative impacts. And as many people may already know, that our administrator Regan at EPA, early in his term with us, he directed EPA to use cumulative impact assessment to better serve historically marginalized communities. And ORD was an early adopter of this within EPA. We were starting up our strategic planning process for our research portfolio for the next 4 years going forward, which continues through 2026. And our leadership, Dr. Chris Frey, wanted to ensure that our research would advance the science of cumulative impacts to address and support the administrator's priority. So my colleague Susan Julius and I led the effort to develop a report, the Cumulative Impacts Research Recommendations for EPA's Office of Research and Development, to inform our research planning processes and the work that ORD would do during that time frame that we're working on now. And so we had a lot of listening sessions with tribes, state agencies, local agencies, and associations, as well as workshops with our internal partners in program and regional offices who do the policy work at EPA, as well as community member panels, consultation with the Science Advisory Board, which is EPA's external peer review body, to inform the development of this report. This report was the first document that EPA released related to cumulative impacts, and it set the definitions of cumulative impacts and cumulative impact assessment that EPA has now adopted more broadly. EPA has also released other cumulative impact related documents. Our General Counsel's Office released EJ Legal Tools to Advance Environmental Justice and the Cumulative Impacts Addendum to that report. And EPA is in the process of finalizing a cumulative impacts framework for how programs and regions consider cumulative impacts. But going back briefly to what ORD is doing, we developed and have ongoing over 140 different research efforts underway related to environmental justice and cumulative impacts. This research covers all 6 of ORD's national research programs, and we kind of categorize it in terms of 4 main buckets. We talk about vulnerability and exposure, so our research that helps to identify the sources, assess and monitor exposures, and understand vulnerabilities to chemical stressors in the air, water, and land, non-chemical stressors, including social determinants of health, and a changing climate that may exacerbate the total burden experienced by communities. The second area of our research includes characterizing health and ecosystem impacts. This is research that seeks to understand and estimate the health and environmental effects of exposure to multiple chemical and non-chemical stressors within the ability to promote equity, benefits for clean air, water, land, and ecosystem services. The third bucket of our research focuses on mitigation options and solutions. So here we're doing research to bolster the scientific basis for actions to improve community health and well-being, and to select, implement, and evaluate such actions, including, for example, research to effectively engage with communities to identify solutions and options to mitigate exposure to pollutants, remediate contaminated sites, restore sites to productive use, and revitalize communities. And then finally, the last bucket of research is focused on resources to support decision making. So this is development of tools, models, and data sets ranging from site-specific to national scale that can be used by EPA and communities to identify, characterize, and solve environmental problems where they're most acute in and with communities that are most at risk and least resilient. We also have been promoting cumulative impacts research through our Science to Achieve Results extramural research program. We've funded more than 40 grants and $54 million on cumulative impacts related research so far. And finally, I'll mention that EPA has asked the National Academies of Science to undertake a state of the science of cumulative impact assessment that will advise on how EPA might further develop the scientific foundation underlying the practice of community impact assessment, cumulative impact assessment. So we're looking for this committee to produce the equivalent of the Red Book, what the Red Book was for risk assessment in the early 1980s. So all of this is about internal EPA, but really, what I'm looking forward to doing more strategically is working together across agencies, because we know EPA has limited authorities, and we need to work together across our multiple authorities and leverage our expertise across agencies to really make sure that we can address the community's priority cumulative impacts concerns. So I'm pleased that this report directs agencies to coordinate on this topic, and look forward to continuing to that momentum.
Awesome. Definitely appreciate and acknowledge the importance of cumulative impacts, that our communities often are not experiencing one burden at a time, but there are multiple burdens, and these burdens can be compounding. So the energy that is dedicated towards prioritizing this is greatly appreciated. So with this, I'll move to another question, and once again, open it to anyone who would like to hop in first. Staying on this track of the highlights of the research plan, what is felt out of reach when moving to advance environmental justice within your agency or within a particular program? And are there elements of the plan that might help move that needle?
I was
I
going to
just
give Kelly a chance to talk since she did it before I jumped in, but I don't want to call you out, Kelly.
I say I wouldn't say it felt out of reach. It's and maybe because I'm still stuck on what excites me. But I'll say one of the things that I think even going through the process of developing the strategic plan was help give us an opportunity to connect on the subject of environmental justice research with our national labs, and to really kind of reinvigorate a partnership just on getting in touch with the labs on how they themselves were already making efforts to already instill some of the principles that are recommendations in this document, but we were able to learn from them and hear from them where they are. And so through the development of this plan, as kind of guided by Executive Order 14096 that charges agencies to the extent practicable by law, ensure that our federally owned contractor operated facilities uphold the objectives of this order. In that vein, when developing this research agenda, the Department of Energy, which has 17 national labs all doing research, when we're trying to develop this plan to kind of guide the research, which we have a huge research function at the Department of Energy, and going beyond, let's say, just environmental justice, but this larger concept of energy justice, balancing all of the social and economic levers that influence our energy system. I think it was really important that our national labs had an opportunity to engage with us and the research, the writing team on the development of this research plan, and that these recommendations are kind of already pre-tested with some of these large research institutions, where they have been already kind of making some strides in this work and were able to share this opportunity with us and continue to uh, it really helped us in the development of the plan, and it was really an opportune time for the committee to engage with some of the labs and hear about some of the great work that they do, which is featured in the publication as well.
Oh, wonderful. Excellent to hear about that feature. I'll pause if anyone else would like to answer this question as well. And if not, I will move us to our next question.
I don't mind jumping in. I think one thing I was going to say was, I don't know if it's out of reach or just, we were thirsty for more guidance in this area. And I think that's, how do federal agencies intentionally work with people who have lived experience in these areas that we are trying to get a better understanding of through our science, through our data collections, through our policies to make sure that we really understand the conditions that's affecting certain populations and making sure that the solutions we're coming up with through environmental justice efforts are the most appropriate for those who are impacted by these issues. I think it has been phenomenal to see that in this research plan, if you're someone like me who has brought their lived experience with them in almost every position that they occupied, um, wondering how can others get comfortable understanding the true value and the importance of lived experience. It's highlighted in this research plan. Not only is it highlighted, it's called out. There are examples that say, the lived experiences project that the HHS Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation is a tool that you can refer to if you're trying to better understand what is lived experience, what does it look like to equitably engage with people with lived experiences. What are those strategies for equitably identifying people with lived experiences? The list goes on. But I think for me, that was something that I valued, and I thought it was a really great opportunity to share um, the importance and elevate the importance of lived experience with my federal colleagues.
Absolutely, indeed. The importance of lived experience cannot be understated, and was not understated in this research plan. So very much appreciate that. So we'll dig a little bit deeper into the research plan in action, and I'll pose another question to the group. Describe the work from your agency and how it shows this research plan in action. And again, this is open. We'll take any volunteers.
I can give a couple more examples of things EPA is doing. I talked a lot about our cumulative impacts work, but I wanted to give one example about focusing on the meaningful engagement section of the report. And EPA is standing up a center, the Community Engaged Research Collaborative for Learning and Excellence, or CIRCLE, up in Edison, New Jersey. This is a collaborative effort between the Office of Research and Development and our Region 2 office. The purpose of the center is to co-produce actionable knowledge and sustainable solutions with local, underrepresented, and underserved communities. So Circle really will work to nurture long-term and trusting relationships with these communities, and work together to address um, um, to build a place-based capacity to combine stated needs of communities with EPA's research priorities and be able to facilitate co-production of research designed to benefit the communities as well as contribute to producing scientific knowledge. So we're really excited that that's getting up and underway. And just when Christy talked about the section of the report focused on and sort of building on what Melissa just said, related to lived experience, qualitative data, and mixed methods, I want to highlight one of the tools that EPA recently put out, and that's called the Equitable Resilience Builder. And this tool supports communities in resilience planning with a focus on equity. It was developed by some of our social scientists engaging with local government and community groups. They used a case study design approach that was also trauma informed. So it's a pretty unique product, and it's designed to acknowledge deeply rooted social forces that affect how community members are made vulnerable to disasters and climate risk and may experience cascading consequences of incidents and bear disproportionate burdens of actions to increase their resilience. So those are just a couple more examples of things EPA is doing. Oh, sorry, can I say one more? And that is related to our tribal engagement. I just wanted to mention that we have a team of scientists working with our general counsel's office right now to develop a framework for, and I think this is the first at EPA to develop a data sovereignty agreement. So hopefully that can be used as a model for all our research with tribes going forward.
Oh, wonderful. Very much appreciated. Appreciate having the opportunity to hear more about EPA's programs that feature meaningful community engagement, that focus on lived experience, and utilizing that information as well as qualitative data and tribal engagement. Thanks so much. Is there anyone else that would like to describe the work from your agencies and how it is putting the research plan in action?
I'll just chime in here. And at the Office of Energy Justice and Equity, we do have a research branch, and the research division also has their own environmental justice research agenda that is leaning very heavily into the recommendations from the federal research agenda. And that's one of the kind of the beautiful things about the way this is evolving. We now have federal agencies that are developing their own environmental justice research agendas that can look to this plan for guidance and for recommendations and how to build those out. At the Department of Energy, for the last few years, primarily our focus has been on research to inform the implementation of our Justice 40 policy priorities. At the Department of Energy, we have 8 policy priorities for implementing environmental justice in terms of the types of benefits that we expect for our funding instruments to bring to disadvantaged communities. Those include things from decreasing energy burden or the cost of providing energy in one's home, to increasing opportunities for minority-owned businesses to engage in the energy economy, increasing resiliency in disadvantaged communities, and increasing energy democracy in disadvantaged communities. In order to inform that work, the Department of Energy needs research to help inform where our investments can be most powerful, to evaluate how our programs are impacting folks on the ground. And so we are, like our learning is kind of centered on how do we design programs to expand the inclusion and participation of individuals and underserved communities. How can we promote this concept of energy justice while implementing the Justice 40 initiative, this idea of delivering 40% of the benefits of the overall investments to disadvantaged communities. So we've had to design tools and develop research to inform and also track the progress of that work. Um,
And then I
Awesome.
guess
Thank you, Kelly. Yes, I see you've unmuted. Melissa, please go ahead.
I was going to say, I guess as a funding agency representative, I should probably highlight the funding opportunities while we're here to support environmental justice research efforts. And so one thing I think we heard Dr. Beverly Wright say during this morning's keynote, research for the sake of research is it's okay, but we're looking for research that leads to action. And so one of the ways that I think I see the plan in action at NIH is, previously we had a research funding program called Research to Action, but as our community partners had identified to us, it just wasn't enough time. It was only a 2-year funding mechanism, and I think it was a smaller budget. We have revised that funding mechanism to be a max of 5 year support, which is the max of all of our policies, usually at NIH anyway, and a much larger budget to allow for more direct costs to be awarded. And so this revision and renewal of this funding mechanism was really an announcement that reflected NIEHS and the National Institute of Minority Health Disparities partnership. They came together to show their commitment to addressing environmental health disparities and supporting environmental justice research, but specifically calling on applicants to make sure that their research is sustaining trust and bi-directional communication between academic researchers and impacted communities. I would also highlight that, NIH has some really unique funding opportunities. We've heard time and time again that the people who are actually doing the boots on the ground work when it comes to environmental justice find it hard to be the ones receiving the funding. And so through the Common Fund at NIH, we have supported the Transformative Research to Address Health Disparities and Advance Health Equity Initiative. There's a number of studies that have been funded through that. And I think we could probably provide the link at some point, or you can always reach out to me if you're interested in learning more about each of those studies. But let's talk about where you can still probably get some funding for your work. And so that would be through the Centers of Excellence on Environmental Health Disparities Research. And so we're really excited to announce the notice of intent to to publish this announcement, which has not come out yet. So you still have time to get your ideas together and apply when it does come out, which will be hopefully at the end of July. But this is the first time that we're seeing, multiple ICs or institutes and centers at NIH come together to bring funding together to promote the continuation of environmental health disparities research, conduct environmental justice research, and it states environmental justice in the actual notice of funding. Engage in research capacity building. I think Dr. Wright talked about the infrastructure needs and capacity building of CBOs to be able to maintain funding from the federal agencies. And this is an opportunity, as well as understanding the impacts of social determinants of health. And then I guess last, but certainly not least, I would just say, I think we've all heard about the Common Fund's Compass, Community Partnerships to Advance Science for Society. And this model is one that we're really proud of because the money goes directly to the community organization or the community partner, and they get to choose who their research partner is. And it doesn't have to be an academic or federal partner. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And this, although it's a 5-year funding plan, it's designed to support these projects for 10 years, meaning that there's time for implementation at the end, but there's also time for getting together and coming up with a study design at the very beginning, and then doing the study design and then sustaining it. So a 10-year research program or plan is something that hadn't really been seen before Compass, and especially for it to be community led and community driven in terms of the funding. And so I think these are examples of how we could see the research plan in action across HHS.
Oh, it is wonderful to hear about the research plan in action across EPA and Department of Energy and HHS. It really interesting to hear the through point of research, as Kelly shared, how ensuring energy justice and energy democracy is executed requires research to ensure that we're meeting those goals. And then really appreciate also what Melissa has shared, how National Institute of Health was able to be responsive when community said, this is not enough time to be able to make effective change, and was able to be responsive to that. So really exciting to hear that. Really also exciting to hear a preview of upcoming opportunities. I'm sure our audience greatly appreciated that as well. But I love what you said about sustaining trust with communities, the challenge of that, and then also that learning is bi-directional. It's not one way, it's bi-directional, and the importance of that. So really appreciate all that has been shared thus far. So I have one more question for this part of the discussion before we open it up to audience Q&A. And I'll just give you a heads up, Melissa, I'm going to lean to you for audience Q&A because I think you may be better able to see those questions. But I'll go ahead and pose this last question before we get into the audience questions. And it's a two-parter, and look forward to hearing from the experts that are here on this. So, what would you like to see fully accomplished by agencies collectively in the next 5 years related to any section of the research plan? Or what do you think are the biggest opportunities for EJ relevant science, data, and research at your agency? So it's a two-parter. You can answer either or both, but as we round out this portion of the conversation, would love to hear your thoughts as we look ahead in the future with the lens of a research plan. Yes, please go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, I'll say I'll go first, and only because this just dovetails nicely with the work that I'm doing to try to develop the environmental justice strategy for the Department of Energy, but it's very entangled with this research agenda. But just seeing, let's say, an elevation and the standardization of how how the federal government engages with communities around topics, and not only just around how we engage with communities on research, but just how we even engage in communities on how federal government services are reaching communities and the research around that. And so I think that that's one of the things that I'm most excited to see, and that's one of the things that I'm also excited about this research agenda, that it's for federal agencies and kind of can lean into like the unique aspects of what that means for how we serve, and for how we are funded and how we are obligated to be accountable for the way that we spend our funding. And so, with that, finding the pathway to also be accountable to communities in how we research them and how we evaluate the impacts of our work on society. And so, kind of seeing a kind of formalization of like that practice and seeing that elevated is one of the things I'm super excited about beyond outreach and engagement.
I guess I could go next. I'm always trying to be polite.
Didn't know if it was I who froze.
No, I was just like trying to not take over this entire session because I just love this research plan so much. Um, I think I would just say, looking ahead, I definitely am hopeful that we'll get a chance. I think we've already started to see it happening, but to see more of federal agencies efforts to provide equitable access to actionable science, data, and research products. And so, what does that mean? Making our research or the research that we fund and support publicly available, making sure that the creators of it know that they have to make it understandable for everyone, and that it's actionable for communities with these environmental justice concerns. So, thinking about what are our efforts to really focus on language justice, making sure that products are created in various languages and forms of communication, but still thinking about some of the issues that we've been hearing about that I think we're getting on the right path to accomplishing it, and hopefully in the future we'll get there. But which is, how do you make these data publicly available, but still uphold privacy protections and respecting data rights and ownership? Who owns the data? And so thinking about where we started in our conversations at this in federal agencies, I see a path forward, and this plan makes me excited because I think this plan is also giving others an idea of, if you've started down this path, don't abandon all hope, but look to some of the recommendations in this plan to help you figure out, how do you provide real-time information to the public? How do you make sure that you're creating resources and products that are really supporting these communities who have environmental justice concerns? So I hope that answers the question.
More than, and I'll give Sarah some space if you'd like to weigh in as well.
Sure. Thanks, Natasha. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Kelly and Melissa have said. I think, as I mentioned, we have a big portfolio of research in EJ and cumulative impacts right now. In my opinion, I'm hoping that that will continue and be a thread into the future. I think there's important research questions that we've touched on today. I'll just kind of reiterate quickly that I think, will continue to be things that need focus, and not just kind of, to Melissa, what you said about the talk this morning, but not just for research's sake, but research for action's sake. So questions like, how do chemicals and non-chemical stressors interact and contribute to health outcomes on the ground? How do we understand the on the ground realities of what stressors, exposures, and health effects are most impacting communities? And how can we incorporate qualitative approaches and mixed methods into our analyses? So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue to make strides in those areas. So thanks.
Wonderful. I really appreciate each of you sharing your expertise, sharing what's happening at your agencies. This has all been really exciting and really encouraging. And we're moving ahead, and we're continuing to move ahead. And I think that was a key part of what we just heard from Sarah. And other things that stood out to me, accountability. The importance of accountability and accessibility, and the importance of navigating accessibility in terms of being able to have the needed information, but then also dealing with some very real privacy concerns as well. So we're so excited about this research plan. It has information on all that has been discussed today, and we're really excited that there are additional resources to be be able to share in this regard in the research plan. And I think that there have been links that are being circulated as well with reference to what our expert speakers have been sharing about. So really excited to hear from the audience who has been patiently waiting for their questions to be raised. So Melissa, do we have some audience questions to bring into this conversation?
I am looking, and so far I do see one comment. This comment is directly for Kelly from Pamela Bingham. I would like to connect with you. I developed the first DOE EJ training, and they are at UMD. They're a part of the CEEGJH, so they're part of this wonderful center, and so they're looking to connect with all of your DOE EJ training and expertise. And so I believe that, as Natasha said, our contact information, Pamela, will be shared on a slide or coming up. So hopefully you all can make that connection.
Yes, we're incredibly hard to find at our first name dot last name at the Department of Energy.gov.
I actually do not see other questions. And just to let our audience know, I am checking the WOVA platform. So if you have questions that you want to place there, please do so, as well as I'm looking at our YouTube streaming platform for questions. And so we are monitoring your questions. If you would like to enter them, now's your chance.
Awesome. Really appreciate that. Thank you for, I don't know how you were able to have so many eyes in so many places, but really appreciate that you were able to do that. And so grateful to all who have tuned in for this conversation, and certainly the experts that are around this table that have helped inform the research plan, and understanding that our research plan stands on the shoulders of ancestors that have helped to inform and lead to this work. So with that, I'd love to bounce it back to Dr. Christie.
Yes.
Thinking about the research plan and the big picture of the research plan, are there lessons learned from the research plan experience that you'd like to be able to share, and even ideas on the path forward from here? Understanding that this is not in now. This work is ongoing and continues from here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. Gosh, I feel like I learn so much every time I talk to all of you. And I'm sure, Melissa, you're using a series of mirrors. We just can't see it behind your background, right? To be able to see 100 things at once. And so, I think that the thing that I've really loved, honestly, is being able to work with such an amazing group of people and to be able to benefit from, again, the lived experience, the expertise that so many people have offered us and have given to us willingly, that we've been able to benefit. Again, we stand on the shoulders of giants, as you just said, Dr. Natasha. And I think that really seeing this research plan as a part of a continuum that is hopefully contributing to the bending of that arc of history towards justice. And knowing that all of the work that we do, no matter how it is that you're coming into this space, whether it's through research or through policy or just through interest and excitement, that we all have a part to play in it. And so it's really just been a humbling and beautiful experience to be able to be a part of this journey with so many of you. And so, and I'm going to share a screen. And thank you so much, Natasha, for your moderation. It was really wonderful. Thank you to our amazing panelists. My goodness, you all are amazing. And so happy to be able to chat with all of you. I'm going to share my screen again so folks can have this contact information. So, again, please, assuming I can find it, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, thoughts, just general musings about the research plan, or it doesn't even have to be about the research plan itself. It could be about any of the resources or ideas or materials that you heard about today. So I'll leave this up here for a second in case folks want to be able to jot things down or take a quick screenshot. And I think you can go back and review this over time as well. So, and then I think that the links were being put out for, that maybe EPA and NIH and HHS also had, but I also have them here too. So I'll just put them here quickly just so folks can see them. These are our links for EPA. Lots of good things here. Um, we have our links from NIH as well. So this is a couple pages. We have lots of stuff going on, which is really wonderful. So, and some of these links are also in the research plan itself. We highlight, a couple of these initiatives. And so, really making sure just to take a peek at those, at that research plan, the resources, the references. We have, again, really tried to, again, acknowledge and state that we're not in this alone, that this is part of a community, an ecosystem that is moving together, and just so happy to be able to have spent this time with all of you today and with our folks out in the world. Yeah, Melissa, please.
We have another question.
Ah, okay.
So from Emma Steely, good afternoon. I so enjoyed this discussion and learning about your important work. Do you have any recommendations for developing trust between research partners and community members as you move forward with the science, data, and research plan? And I guess this is open to all the panelists and presenters here.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to hear from the agencies. I have thoughts, but I'd love to hear how you all are thinking about it too. That's a great question. Yeah.
I can start. This probably won't be a complete response, but I think finding folks who already work in communities, if you don't have kind of existing connections there, is really important. That could be through academics who have done work there already, or community organizations in the community, or could even be faith-based groups. It could be public health organizations, kind of trusted bodies, and building relationships with them to help gain the trust of the community members. So just some ideas, but I'm sure others have more things to add.
I'd say that the plan is kind of rife with recommendations that kind of drive towards this, but
Yes.
I think, like, most importantly is coming to communities and authenticity early and often, and maintaining lasting connections. And then also, we've said lived experience a lot here. We value it of ourselves, bringing our lived experience along with our technical expertise, but also finding a way to value the lived experience of the communities that we serve, especially when we're thinking about environmental justice, where the justice aspect can only be quantified by the experience of those who are affected by it. And so kind of acknowledging that and coming to those communities in earnest and in partnership, to not be extractive in our research about how we've been extractive in our policies, I think it just goes a long way to building that trust. And I know one thing that, let's say, the research community has different types of relationship with time that we as federal employees have restrictions and guidelines around time. We always say, like, moving at the speed of trust, that, acknowledging how much time it takes to establish lasting relationships and the trust that's necessary to build solid foundation for meaningful engagement. I think, like I said, throughout the research plan, there are ways to do that, but despite how it's done, building that trust, building those lasting relationships, not being extractive, and acknowledging the value of the experience of communities in terms of how we evaluate our work, even as a bare minimum, valuing that as part of a research plan, as part of developing your research questions and how your research can affect communities, goes a long way.
Agreed. Christy, did you want to chime in now?
No, I can't. No, please go ahead. This is so brilliant. I'm taking notes. So I don't think there's anything else I'm going to add yet, but let's see. Go ahead. How much more richness you have, Melissa, there too.
No, I mean, I think between Kelly and Sarah, they covered a lot of what I was going to say. I think the one thing I would also just say is, trust is earned. And one thing I have found out is that even if you are partnering with a community, and it may be a community that you've partnered with several times before, when you go into the relationship or go into the project, not necessarily trying to push your agenda, but learning what it is that they want to share with you and what it is they want to address, they'll get to your agenda item eventually. But it's once they know they can trust you with their data, with their efforts, with their community and the people that they care about. And so it's good to be transparent like Kelly mentioned, there's timeline restrictions. And so it's good to say, you know, I have this NIH funding and we have to meet these milestones by this and this time. But please don't let this get in the way of what it is that we really want to do here. And do you see this as a conflict? And how can we work around this so that we can still keep the funding, but still be authentic in our partnership and really move into action? And so there's that transparency piece, and that comes when you have that, that trust eventually comes, I think, as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. I think, also understanding the history and the context in which you're approaching people, right? So once you've lost trust, it can be hard to build it, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. And so, recognizing the interconnectedness of all of us, all of our work, all of our lives, right? And so whether or not we live in a community with environmental justice concerns or not, the resilience and the health and the well-being of the folks that live in these spaces are critical to our own well-being as well. And so I think that, really being able to understand the history, the context, the ways in which we have to work in order to earn trust back, right? Even if we haven't been the one to harm personally, that doesn't mean that communities or members or individuals haven't been harmed in the past. And so I think that there are a lot of opportunities for us to be able to, build on, just the joy that kind of permeates this moment, to be able to be in these spaces and continue to connect with people, to be able to, again, reflect, honor, and acknowledge that past while, forging ahead in the future too. And so I think so many resources, all of the energy is really heartwarming and hopeful. And so I think that as we're moving forward with not only this research plan, but all of the, again, amazing things we've heard about today, my hope certainly is that, when we have the opportunity to think about this 2 years from now, right, to be able to do the next installment of this research plan, that will have even richer and deeper and even more meaningful examples to be able to share, which again will just increase the depth, because we've been hearing a lot of meaningful things already today. So yeah, this has been. Any other additional questions, or we can wrap it up? Great. This has been good. Hopefully folks have enjoyed our time together. And, thank you for all the amazing work that you all are doing, for being able to come into this into a spirit of growth as well. None of us come into this knowing everything. And so being able to learn and grow with each other, I think, has also been really phenomenal. And so keep doing the wonderful work you're doing, both in this virtual realm and outside of it. For all of you that are out there, we just appreciate all that you're doing to advance environmental justice in your own unique and beautiful ways. So thanks so much. It's been so great to see you all.